In Seoul, there are two kinds of invisible, the kind that hides in shadows to survive, and the kind that hides in plain sight because no one wants to see. At 7 years old, Soo-ah had mastered both. She lived on damp cardboard in an abandoned loading dock, her ribs like piano keys beneath donated clothes, clutching a sketchbook rescued from a dumpster. Inside was a miracle drawn in stolen pencil, a man with dangerous eyes made gentle, powerful hands reaching to comfort instead of harm. At the bottom, in shaky backwards letters, "Daddy, will you come? I promise I'll be good enough." She didn't know the man she'd drawn was Kim Tae-jun, the silent blade, a mafia boss whose name made Seoul's underworld tremble. When a Wednesday afternoon sent her drawing skittering across wet pavement to land at his polished shoes, when he bent down and saw himself reimagined as a father, something cracked in the architecture of his carefully constructed walls. This is the story of a drawing that saved 2 lives. One from starvation and invisibility, one from the prison of becoming a monster. Can a man built to destroy learn to protect? Can a starving child trust the wolf? What happens when innocence collides with darkness and asks it to become light? Soo-ah spent 7 years of her life terrified of one thing, being invisible. She drew a father because she was a child drowning in a world that refused to see her. Right now, we know exactly how she feels. I'm speaking to you from the ruins of what we built. Without a single strike, without a word of warning, YouTube deleted our main channel. Years of our work, stories that touched millions of souls, were erased in a heartbeat. The algorithm decided we didn't exist anymore. They made us invisible. But just like Tae-jun looked at that tattered drawing and chose to save a life, we are choosing to fight back. We are building this family again from nothing in the cold. But the truth is, we can't do it without you. If you just watch this and click away, the algorithm wins. If you stay silent, we disappear forever, just like a child in a loading dock. I am asking you, not as a viewer but as part of this family, don't let us be forgotten. Prove that we aren't invisible. Hit that subscribe button right now. It's more than a click, it's a vote for our survival. And please, leave a comment below telling us which country you are watching from. We need to see your names. We need to see where our global family is standing. From the US to Canada, from the UK to the Philippines. Write your country in the comments so we know we aren't building this alone. If this story touched you, if you believe that broken things deserve a second chance, then like this video and subscribe. Don't let the system silence these stories. Soo-ah found her home. Will you help us find ours again? Subscribe. Comment your country. Don't let us disappear. Let us continue our story. The cardboard beneath Soo-ah was damp, not from rain but from the kind of cold that lived in concrete, the kind that pressed into your bones and never left. 7 years old, though she'd stopped counting after 6. Numbers meant birthdays, and birthdays meant someone should remember you existed. No one did. The morning smelled like rotting vegetables from the market 3 blocks away. Her stomach cramped, a fist clenching and unclenching, but she'd learned to breathe through it. If you breathed slowly enough, hunger became background noise, like traffic or distant sirens. She pressed her palm against her belly, feeling how small she'd become. Her ribs were piano keys beneath her donated sweater. 2 sizes too large, holes in both elbows. The fabric scratched. Everything scratched. At the corner store, Mr. Choi swept his entrance and didn't see her. Or pretended not to. His eyes would slide past her face like water off glass. There, but refusing to touch, refusing to acknowledge. If I stay very still, she thought, maybe I'll disappear completely. Maybe that would be easier. But is invisibility a mercy or a curse when you're 7 years old and starving? 3 boys from the elementary school crossed the street when they saw her. Last week they'd thrown stones. Small ones, the size of marbles, but thrown with the careless cruelty of children who'd learned that some people were safe to hurt. Dirty orphan, the tallest one had said. Not yelling. Just stating a fact the way you'd say, it's Tuesday, or the sky is blue. She'd wanted to tell him she bathed in the public restroom at the subway station every 3 days, that she scrubbed her skin until it was pink and raw, that she wasn't dirty, she was just poor. But the words stuck in her throat like stones of their own. Her heart felt like an empty room with no windows, dark, airless, forgotten. That afternoon, behind the art supply store, she found it. A sketchbook in the dumpster. Most pages torn out, but 17 remained. Clean. White. Waiting. She clutched it to her chest like treasure, like a miracle wrapped in cardboard covers. And then, on a bench near the subway, she found him. The newspaper someone had left behind was 3 days old, coffee-stained, but the photograph was clear enough. A man stepping out of a black car. Expensive suit. Sharp face. Dangerous and striking, like cliffs were beautiful. The caption read, "Alleged crime boss Kim Tae-jun seen entering?" She didn't read the rest. Didn't need to. To everyone else, he might have been a monster. But to Soo-ah, looking at that photograph with hungry eyes and a hungrier heart, he looked like someone strong. Someone who could carry heavy things. Someone who wouldn't break. Someone who might, if she wished hard enough, stay. If you were 7 years old and completely alone, who would you choose to be your father? The kind stranger who'd never notice you, or the dangerous man whose strength promised he'd never abandon you? She tore the photograph carefully, folded it small, kept it pressed between her palms for 3 whole blocks, all the way back to the loading dock that smelled of rot and rain. That night, by the light of a street lamp filtering through broken slats, she opened the sketchbook to the first clean page. Her pencil, a stub barely longer than her thumb, moved across paper in whispers. She began to draw a father she'd never had. But what happens when the imaginary father you draw turns out to be terrifyingly real? The private room smelled of expensive whiskey and fear. Kim Tae-jun sat at the head of the table, perfectly still, while the man across from him sweated through his $1,000 suit. 3 of Tae-jun's men stood against the walls, hands resting inside their jackets. Not a threat, just a promise. "You're 3 weeks late," Tae-jun said quietly. His voice was silk over steel, the kind of calm that made smart men nervous. "Explain." The man's hands trembled as he reached for his drink. "The shipment. There were complications at the port. Customs was. Customs is paid to look the other way." Tae-jun's eyes didn't blink. Didn't soften. "Try again." Silence stretched like a knife being slowly drawn from its sheath. Outside the door, a waitress dropped a tray. The sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the restaurant, and everyone froze. When Kim Tae-jun conducted business, even accidents felt dangerous. The man across the table swallowed hard. "I needed more time. The money, I thought I could replace it before. You stole from me." It wasn't a question. Tae-jun leaned back in his chair, the movement casual, controlled. His fingers drummed once against the table, a signal. Minho stepped forward from the shadows, placed a manila folder in front of the trembling man. "Your daughter," Tae-jun said softly, "attends Seoul International School. Your wife gets her hair done at the salon on Gangnam every Thursday at 2. Your mother lives in Busan, apartment 304, building C." The man's face went white. "Please, they have nothing to do with..." "Everything has to do with everything." Tae-jun's voice never rose, never hardened. That was what made him terrifying. "You took from me, which means you took from them. Their safety. Their future. Do you understand? When did protecting what's yours become the same as destroying what's theirs? And does a man who makes that choice still deserve to be called human?" The man nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'll get you the money. Every one. I swear. You have 48 hours. Tae-jun stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precise movements. "After that, I stopped being reasonable." He walked out without looking back. His men followed like shadows, leaving the broken man sobbing into his hands. In the restaurant's main dining area, 3 waitresses pressed themselves against the wall as Tae-jun passed. The owner bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. A family eating dinner, father, mother, 2 children, went silent, the father's hand instinctively moving to shield his daughter's face. Tae-jun saw it. That protective gesture. That automatic, thoughtless love. Something tightened in his chest. Old, familiar, unwanted. He pushed it down where it belonged, buried under years of carefully constructed walls. Outside, the city lights of Seoul blurred against the night sky. His driver opened the car door, but Tae-jun paused, watching his reflection in the tinted window. Sharp suit. Cold eyes. The face of a man who'd built an empire on fear because fear meant control, and control meant never being helpless again. He was 7 years old again, hiding in a closet, listening to his father's fists find his mother's face, learning that the world was divided into two kinds of people. Those who took and those who got taken from. He was 9, stealing food because his father drank away the grocery money. He was 11, realizing that salvation was a fairy tale for children whose parents loved them. No one had loved him. So he'd learned to love nothing, to need nothing, to be nothing except powerful. It had worked. He'd climbed from that closet to the top of Seoul's underworld. He had money, respect, fear. Everything he'd ever wanted. Everything except the one thing that family in the restaurant had without trying. Someone who'd shield their child's face when danger walked past. Sir? Minho's voice cut through the memory. The next meeting is in 20 minutes. The Yakuza representative. I'll be there. Taejun slid into the car, the leather seat cold against his back. Through the window, he watched the family exit the restaurant. The little girl holding her father's hand, laughing about something safe and warm and seen. His phone buzzed. Another deal. Another threat. Another day in a life built on the bones of the boy who'd once believed someone might save him. But here's what Taejun didn't know as his car pulled into traffic. 3 blocks away, in an abandoned loading dock that smelled of rot and broken dreams, a 7-year-old girl was drawing his face with a stolen pencil. Drawing him not as the silent blade, not as the monster who made grown men weep, but as something else entirely. Something softer. Kinder. Reaching toward her instead of away. If you'd spent your whole life becoming a monster to survive, would you recognize yourself if someone saw you as human? Or would it terrify you more than any enemy ever could? The car turned a corner and Taejun checked his watch. 18 minutes until the next meeting. 18 minutes to be the man everyone expected, cold, calculating, untouchable. He had no idea that in less than 48 hours, a piece of paper would fall at his feet and shatter everything he'd spent 20 years building. But fate was already drawing the map, and their paths were about to collide. Soo-ah saw him on a Tuesday, though she didn't know Tuesdays from Thursdays anymore. Days blurred together when survival was the only calendar that mattered. She was crouched behind a dumpster near the market, waiting for the vegetable vendor to turn his back so she could grab the wilted lettuce he'd thrown away, when the black car slid past like a shadow made of steel and money. It stopped at the intersection. Just for a moment. Traffic light red against the gray Seoul sky. And through the tinted window, just barely, just enough, she saw him. A man in the back seat. Sharp suit. Sharper face. He was looking at something on his phone, his expression carved from stone, unreadable and distant. But there was something in the way he held himself, something in the severe line of his jaw, the controlled stillness of his posture, that made Soo-ah's breath catch. Strong, she thought. The word arrived fully formed, instinctive. Not strong like the boys who threw stones, that was cruelty wearing strength's mask. This was different. This was the kind of strength that could carry heavy things. The kind that wouldn't break under weight. The light changed. The car moved. And he was gone. But Soo-ah stayed crouched behind that dumpster, heart beating strange and fast, wondering why a stranger's face through tinted glass felt like seeing something important. Like finding a word you'd been searching for but didn't know you needed. She didn't know his name. Didn't know that mothers pulled their children closer when he walked past, that restaurant owners bowed until their spines ached, that his fingerprints were on half the crime in Seoul. She didn't know he was called the Silent Blade, or that grown men wept when he spoke their names. All she knew was, he looked like someone who'd understand loneliness. Someone who wouldn't flinch from broken things because maybe he was broken too. Is it possible to fall in love with the idea of being saved before you even know you need saving? Or do orphans carry that knowledge in their bones from birth? That afternoon, hunting through the recycling bins behind the convenience store for anything, a dropped coin, an unopened snack, a miracle, she found the newspaper. 3 days old, coffee stained, torn at the corners. She almost passed it by. Almost. But something made her stop. Made her unfold it. Made her look. And there, page 7, bottom corner, grainy black and white photograph, was the man from the car. Alleged crime boss Kim Taejun seen entering. Her eyes skipped over the words. They didn't matter. Words like alleged, and crime, and boss, were adult things, complicated things, things that lived in a world she'd never been invited to understand. What mattered was the photograph. The face. Those same severe features, that same controlled power, caught mid-step as he exited a vehicle, one hand adjusting his cuff, his expression unreadable. To everyone else reading that newspaper over morning coffee, he was a cautionary tale. A villain. A reason to lock doors and avoid dark alleys. But Soo-ah looked at that photograph and saw something different. She saw the slight tension in his shoulders, the kind she recognized from her own body, always braced for impact. She saw the careful distance he kept from the people around him, like someone who'd learned that closeness meant pain. She saw the armor he wore, invisible but real, the kind you built when the world taught you that being soft meant being destroyed. She saw someone like her. Alone in a crowd. Strong because he had to be. Hard because softness was a luxury neither of them could afford. Her hands, small, dirty, shaking slightly from hunger, carefully tore the photograph from the page. She folded it once, twice, small enough to hide in her palm. Then she pressed it between her hands like a prayer and walked 3 blocks back to the loading dock, the paper warming against her skin. That night, the street lamp above her makeshift shelter flickered, on, off, casting dancing shadows across the damp cardboard she called a bed. Soo-ah sat cross-legged, the rescued sketchbook open on her lap, the newspaper photograph laid carefully beside it. Her pencil stub, so short now her fingers cramped around it, hovered over the blank page. She'd never drawn a person before. Had practiced flowers once, back when the shelter still let her stay before the paperwork got lost and she got lost with it. Had drawn simple houses with triangle roofs and square windows. But never a face. Never someone real. What if you had one chance to draw the father you'd never had? Would you draw him as he really was, or as you desperately needed him to be? She started with his eyes. In the photograph they were dark, unreadable, guarded. But Soo-ah's pencil made them softer. Added the tiniest crinkle at the corners, the kind that came from smiling. From laughing. From looking at someone you loved and feeling that love reflected back. She drew his mouth next. In the photo it was a hard line. She curved it upward. Just slightly. Just enough. His hands, in the photograph, adjusting a cuff, efficient and controlled. On her page, reaching forward. Palm open. Inviting. Line by line, stroke by stroke, she transformed him. Took the dangerous man from the newspaper and reimagined him as something impossible. Safe. Kind. Hers. She drew him sitting across from her at a table. Drew a bowl of soup between them, steam rising in careful, hopeful lines. Drew him tucking a blanket around her shoulders. Drew his hand resting on her head, gentle, protective. Drew him smiling at her like she was someone worth smiling for. The tears came without warning, hot and silent, dropping onto the page and smudging the pencil lines. She wiped them quickly, carefully, afraid of ruining her work. This drawing was becoming something sacred. Something necessary. "Daddy," she whispered to the page, testing the word. It felt foreign in her mouth, like speaking a language she'd never learned. "Daddy, I had a hard day today." The street lamp flickered. A cold wind snaked through the broken slats above her head. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. But Soo-ah kept drawing. Kept talking to the paper, father taking shape beneath her fingers. "Mr. Choi threw away old bread today. I waited until he left, but the dogs got there first. It's okay. I'm not that hungry." Her stomach growled, betraying the lie. "If you were real, would you think I was good enough?" The question hung in the cold air, unanswered and unanswerable. She traced the drawn face with one finger, careful not to smudge. "I try to be good. I don't steal unless I'm really, really hungry. And I always say thank you even when people can't hear me. I say it in my head. That counts, doesn't it?" In the margin, beneath the drawing, her hand moved almost without conscious thought. Letters shaky, some backwards, some barely legible. "I promise I'll be good. Please come. Please be real." She fell asleep with the sketchbook clutched to her chest, her cheek pressed against the drawn father's face, pretending, desperately, fiercely, that she could feel warmth there. What Soo-ah couldn't know, was that 3 miles away in a penthouse apartment overlooking the Han River, Kim Tae-jun was standing at his window, unable to sleep, staring at his reflection in the glass and wondering when he'd become unrecognizable to himself. What she didn't know was that in exactly 42 hours, her foot would catch on uneven pavement, and that sketchbook would fly from her hands, and one page would land at the feet of the very man she'd drawn. What she didn't know was that the universe was about to do something cruel or kind or both. It was about to make her imaginary father terrifyingly, dangerously real. But for now, in this moment, she slept with a drawing pressed against her heart and a prayer on her lips. Please come. Please be real. And somewhere in the Seoul night, fate was already answering. But would the answer save her, or destroy them both? The street lamp became her sun. For 3 nights, Soo-ah sat beneath its flickering glow, pencil stub gripped between fingers that cramped and ached, drawing a father into existence one careful line at a time. During the day she survived. Timed the restaurant waste schedules, avoided the boys with stones, made herself small and invisible and forgettable. But when darkness fell and the city's sharp edges softened into shadow, she returned to the loading dock, opened her sketchbook, and stepped into a world where someone wanted her. On the second night, she drew him reading her a story. She'd never owned a book, but she'd seen them through shop windows, thick volumes with golden letters on the spines, pages that whispered secrets when you turned them. In her drawing, he sat beside her, a book open on his lap, his finger pointing to words she couldn't read but desperately wanted to learn. She drew herself leaning against his shoulder, safe and warm, his arm wrapped around her like a shield against everything cold and cruel in the world. "What would you read to me?" she whispered to the drawing, her breath forming small clouds in the November air. "Would you do the voices? Make the characters sound different? I think you would. I think you'd be good at that." Her stomach cramped. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, not since finding those rice grains stuck to a discarded container, but she pushed the hunger down, made it background noise. The drawing was more important. The drawing was everything. On the 3rd night, she drew the scene that would change both their lives forever, though she didn't know it yet. She drew him at a table, a real table, not cardboard or concrete, but wood, solid and permanent. Drew dishes spread between them. Soup steaming in bowls, rice white and fluffy, vegetables she'd seen in market stalls but never tasted. Drew herself sitting across from him, small and shy, but there. Visible. See. And she drew his face, that dangerous, beautiful face from the newspaper, transformed by her pencil into something she'd never had but always needed. A father looking at his daughter like she was the most important thing in the world. But would a real father ever look at a girl like her that way? A girl who smelled like subway bathrooms and wore donated clothes with holes? A girl nobody wanted? She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling her heart beat against her ribs. Those piano keys that played a song of hunger and hope in equal measure. "I know I'm not much," she said to the drawing, her voice barely audible over the distant traffic. "I'm small and dirty and probably not smart enough. The boys at school say orphans are broken. That's why nobody keeps us. We're broken and nobody wants broken things." Her eyes burned, but she blinked the tears back. Crying wouldn't help. Crying never helped. But maybe, her voice cracked. Maybe if I promise to be really, really good. If I'm quiet and I don't ask for much and I try really hard to not be broken anymore. Maybe then. She couldn't finish the sentence. The hope was too big, too fragile, too dangerous to speak aloud. Instead, she turned to a fresh page and drew one more picture. The most important one. The one that would become her prayer, her wish, her desperate bid for salvation. She drew him standing in front of the loading dock. Her loading dock with its rusted doors and broken slats. Drew him looking directly at her with those eyes she'd made kind, his hand extended, palm up, offering. Offering what? Safety? Oh, well, all three? Everything she'd never had? And at the bottom, in letters that took her 20 minutes to form because her hand shook so badly and some of the letters kept coming out backwards, she wrote, "Daddy, will you come? I'll wait for you. I promise I'll be good enough." She read the words back to herself 3 times, making sure they said what her heart meant. Then she carefully, so carefully, drew a tiny heart beside her own stick figure self in the picture. Just a small one. Just enough to say, I could love you if you'd let me. I already do. That night, she fell asleep clutching the sketchbook so tightly that the cardboard cover left imprints on her palms. She dreamed of warm soup and gentle hands and a voice calling her name, not with irritation or dismissal, but with affection. With ownership. With pride. My daughter, the dream voice said. My Soo-ah. She woke before dawn, the dream evaporating like breath in cold air, leaving only the ache of its absence. The loading dock was still damp. Her stomach was still empty. The world was still made of rough edges that reminded her she didn't fit. But she had the drawings. And the drawings were real in a way nothing else in her life was real. They were proof that somewhere, in the space between pencil and paper, between hope and imagination, a version of her existed that someone could love. What happens when the only thing keeping you alive is a lie you've drawn into existence? And what happens when that lie suddenly, impossibly, becomes real? Wednesday morning arrived gray and cold, bringing with it a wind that smelled like rain. Soo-ah tucked the sketchbook carefully inside her too large sweater, protecting it from the dampness. The pages had become sacred text, proof of a father who existed nowhere except in her desperate heart. She had a routine. Wednesdays meant the restaurant 3 streets over threw out their waste. If she timed it right, sometimes there were scraps. Today she was running, not from danger but toward the possibility of food, her thin legs pumping, her breath coming in small clouds. She didn't see the uneven pavement. Didn't see the crack that had been there for months, a trap waiting patiently for the right moment to spring. Her foot caught. Time slowed, turned syrupy and strange. She felt herself falling forward, arms windmilling, trying to catch balance that was already lost. The sketchbook slipped from inside her sweater, that precious, sacred sketchbook, and flew from her hands like a bird shot from the sky. No, the word ripped from her throat. Pages scattered, fluttered, danced on the wind like they were mocking her, like they'd been waiting for this moment to escape. She scrambled on hands and knees, grabbing at them desperately, but the wind was faster, crueler, more efficient at destruction than she was at salvation. One page, the most important one, the one with the restaurant scene, the one with the words I promise I'll be good enough, slipped further, carried by a cold gust that smelled like coming rain. It skittered across wet pavement, tumbling end over end, dancing away from her reaching fingers. And landed face up at a pair of polished black shoes that cost more than most people earned in a month. Soo-ah's heart stopped. Actually stopped. She felt it freeze in her chest, felt time crystallize into something breakable and sharp. She knew those shoes. She'd seen them in the newspaper photograph. Had memorized every detail of that image before tearing it out and keeping it like a talisman. Slowly, so slowly the world seemed to tilt on its axis, she lifted her eyes. Past the expensive shoes. Past the perfectly tailored suit pants. Past the hand that was already reaching down, fingers extending toward her drawing. Up to the face that she'd spent 3 nights reimagining with a pencil stub and desperate hope. Kim Tae-jun stood 6 feet tall, backlit by the gray Seoul morning, 3 men in dark suits flanking him like shadows given human form. His face was exactly like the photograph, sharp, cold, carved from something harder than bone, but real now, 3-dimensional, breathing, alive. He bent down, picked up her drawing with fingers that had, according to the newspaper caption, done terrible things. Things orphan girls probably shouldn't know about but learned anyway because the streets taught lessons school never did. And as his eyes scanned the page, as they took in the crude drawing of himself sitting beside a small girl, as they read the shaky backwards letters at the bottom, something happened that Soo-ah didn't understand. His hand began to tremble. Just slightly. Just enough to make the paper shake. His jaw tightened. His eyes widened, barely perceptible but there. Real. And in that moment, Soo-ah realized something that made her blood run cold and hot all at once. He recognized himself in her drawing. The most dangerous man in Seoul was staring at a child's fantasy, and something in him was breaking. But was it breaking open, or breaking apart? Time crystallized into glass, fragile, about to shatter. The alley held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting to see what happened when innocence collided with the underworld, when a child's desperate prayer met the man she'd prayed to without knowing his name. Taejun's eyes scanned the page. What? Twice? His lips parted slightly, like he wanted to speak but had forgotten how. The drawing showed him, unmistakably him despite the childish lines and smudged pencil, sitting beside a small girl at a table laden with food. His arm was around her shoulders. He was smiling. Actually smiling. And at the bottom, in handwriting that looked like it had been formed by someone still learning the shape of hope. Daddy, will you come? I'll wait for you. I promise I'll be good enough. The words hit him like bullets he couldn't dodge. Sir? Minho's voice cut through the silence, careful, uncertain. His hand moved inside his jacket where a gun rested against his ribs. Should we? Quiet. The word came out rough, barely controlled. Taejun's hand was shaking. Actually shaking. The paper trembled between his fingers like a white flag in a war he hadn't known he was fighting. His men exchanged glances. In 5 years of working for the Silent Blade, they'd seen him negotiate with Yakuza bosses without flinching, break bones without changing expression, order executions with the casual tone of someone ordering coffee. They'd never seen his hands shake. Soo-ah couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her lungs had turned to stone, heavy and useless in her chest. She watched him watch her drawing, watched something flicker across his face too quick to name. Shock? Recognition? Shame burned through her, hot and poisonous. She'd been caught. Caught wanting. Caught needing. Caught dreaming of something so far beyond her reach it was laughable. She'd taken his face from a newspaper and turned him into a fantasy, and now the real him was standing here, staring at the evidence of her desperate, pathetic hope. When you're caught wanting something you'll never have, do you apologize for the wanting or for getting caught? I'm sorry. Her voice came out tiny, broken. I'll go. I'm sorry. I won't. I didn't mean to. She scrambled to gather the other scattered pages, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp them. Tears pressed behind her eyes, but she'd learned not to let them fall. Tears made adults uncomfortable, made them leave faster, and even though she wanted to disappear, wanted the pavement to open up and swallow her whole, some small part of her needed to collect her drawings first. They were all she had. The only family she'd ever known, even if they were just pencil lines on dumpster paper. Stop. His voice cut through her panic like a knife through silk. She froze, one hand still reaching for a page that showed him reading her a story. Look at me. It wasn't a request. Commands came naturally to men like him. Men who'd spent their lives making people obey through fear or respect or both. But there was something in his tone that wasn't quite either. Something raw. Uncertain. Slowly, Soo-ah lifted her eyes to his face. Up close he was more than the photograph. More than her drawings. He was real in a way that made her chest ache. Sharp cheekbones, severe mouth, eyes so dark they looked black in the gray morning light. But there were things the photograph hadn't shown. The faint scar above his left eyebrow, the tension in his jaw that spoke of clenched teeth and swallowed words, the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes like he hadn't slept properly in years. He looked like someone who'd forgotten how to rest, how to feel safe, how to be anything except dangerous. He looked, she realized with a jolt that went through her like electricity, alone. How long? His voice was quieter now, but somehow that made it more intense, like he was barely holding something back. How long have you been alone? The question hit her like a physical blow. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. No one had asked her that. Not the social worker who'd processed her 3 years ago and promptly lost her file. Not the shelter workers who'd given her a bed for 2 weeks before budget cuts forced them to prioritize more manageable cases. Not the strangers who stepped over her on cold nights, eyes carefully averted, pretending she was just another piece of street debris. No one had asked because asking meant seeing her, and seeing her meant acknowledging that a 7-year-old child was surviving alone in a city that chewed up adults and spit out bones. But he was asking. This dangerous man with her fantasy father clutched in his trembling hand was asking like her answer mattered. Like she mattered. I don't. Her voice cracked. 3 years? Maybe? I'm not sure. I stopped counting. Something crossed his face. A flash of pain so intense it looked physical, like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. His jaw clenched. His free hand curled into a fist at his side, knuckles going white. Behind him, his men shifted uncomfortably. One of them, younger, maybe new to the crew, muttered something in Korean she didn't quite catch. Minho shot him a look sharp enough to draw blood, and the man went silent. If you were one of the most feared men in Seoul, and a starving child handed you a drawing of yourself as her father, would you walk away? Or would you recognize yourself in her desperation? Taejun stared at the drawing again. His eyes traced the crude lines, the smudged pencil, the backwards letters. She'd drawn him with kind eyes. With a gentle smile. With hands reaching toward her instead of away. She'd looked at a photograph of a crime boss, a man whose name made grown men weep, whose reputation was built on violence and fear, and drawn him as salvation. I promise I'll be good enough. The words burrowed into his chest like shrapnel, like broken glass, like every memory he'd spent 20 years trying to bury. He was 7 years old again, hiding in a closet, praying for someone to save him. He was 9, stealing food, promising God or fate or anyone listening that he'd be good if they'd just help him. He was 11, realizing that salvation was a fairy tale, that good wasn't enough, that the world was divided into predators and prey, and he'd be damned if he stayed prey. He'd built an empire on that realization. Had become the thing others feared because fear meant control, and control meant never being helpless again. But this child, this impossibly small, impossibly fragile child, had looked at him and seen something else. Had seen a father. Had spent 3 nights drawing him as the man he'd never been, the man he'd stopped believing he could be. Had written, I promise I'll be good enough, like love was something you earned through perfect behavior, like being a child wasn't enough reason to be wanted. And something in him cracked. Clean through. Right down the middle. Sir? Minho's voice again, careful, confused. We have the meeting with the Yakuza representative in 40 minutes. If we don't leave now, cancel it. The words came out before Taejun even knew he was going to say them. His men froze. Sir? I said cancel it. His voice came out rougher than intended. He cleared his throat, tried again. All of them. Today's meetings. Cancel them all. But the Yakuza deal has been in negotiation for 3 months. If we don't show, cancel them. Each word was a hammer strike, final and absolute. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Taejun looked at the girl. Really looked at her. She was tiny. Impossibly, heartbreakingly tiny. Swimming in clothes meant for someone twice her size, the fabric hanging off her frame like a tent on poles. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair matted, her eyes too large for her face. Hungry eyes, haunted eyes, eyes that had seen too much and expected nothing good. Those eyes watched him now with pure terror, and something in his chest shattered completely. This was what he'd become. So feared that starving children looked at him like death itself. So removed from humanity that his own men couldn't comprehend him showing mercy to a girl clutching drawings to her chest like they were the only things keeping her alive. He'd won. He'd climbed from that closet to the top of Seoul's underworld. He had power, money, respect, fear. Everything he'd ever wanted. Everything except the one thing that family in the restaurant had without trying. Someone who looked at them and saw home instead of danger. Can you become a monster to survive and still find your way back to being human? Or is transformation a one-way street? When did you last eat? He kept his voice soft, but it still made her flinch. She looked down at her hands. Didn't answer. That silence, he knew that silence. Had lived that silence. Had felt hunger gnaw so deep it became part of your skeleton, part of your DNA. There's a restaurant 2 blocks from here, he heard himself say, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff without checking if there was water below. Walk with me. Terror flashed across her face, so raw and immediate it was like watching someone get hit. I don't have money. I'm not asking you to pay. He folded the drawing carefully, so carefully, like it was made of something more precious than paper, and slipped it inside his jacket pocket, against his heart. I'm asking you to walk with me. She stared at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. Like the concept of someone offering her something without demanding payment was so alien she couldn't process it. Behind him, his men were statues of confusion and barely concealed shock. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't the job. This was their boss, the silent blade, the man who'd ordered executions over lunch, standing in an alley, asking a street orphan to have a meal with him while multimillion-dollar deals died on the vine. Minho opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Taejun like he was seeing a stranger wearing his boss's face. Taejun extended his hand towards Soo-ah, palm up, offering. She looked at that hand like it might disappear if she reached for it. Like kindness was a magic trick that would reveal its cruelty at the last second. Her own hands clutched the remaining drawings to her chest, protective, desperate. "I won't hurt you," he said quietly, and was shocked to realize he meant it with an intensity that felt religious. "Sacred. I promise. I just want to buy you food." "Why?" The question burst from her lips before she could stop it, desperate and confused and aching. "Why would you? I'm nobody. I'm just—" The words died in her throat, but he heard them anyway. Heard all the words the world had taught her. Worthless, broken, disposable, unwanted. "You drew me as your father," he said, and his voice was steady even though his hands still shook. "That makes you somebody." The wind picked up again, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of rain. Somewhere distant, thunder rumbled. The city moved around them, cars passing, people hurrying to work, the world continuing like it didn't know that in this alley, in this moment, something fundamental was shifting. Soo-ah looked at his extended hand. At the drawings pressed against her chest. At his face. The real face, not the imagined one, harder and more dangerous than any father should be. But his eyes. God, his eyes. They looked at her like she was real. Like she existed. Like her answer mattered more than anything else in the world. When salvation finally arrives, do you trust it? Or do you assume it's just another trap dressed in kind words? Slowly, so slowly her joints creaked with the effort. She reached out one small dirty hand and placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, gentle and warm and impossibly solid. "Okay," she whispered. Behind them, Minho pulled out his phone and began canceling meetings, his face a mask of professional confusion. The other men formed a protective perimeter, hands still resting inside jackets, still scanning for threats, still doing their job even though none of them understood what the job had become. Taejun looked down at the small hand in his, so tiny, so fragile, trusting him despite every reason not to, and felt something in his chest he'd thought was long dead begin to beat again. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you fed." They walked toward the restaurant, an impossible pair, the silent blade and the invisible girl, connected by a drawing that promised a future neither of them knew how to build. But they would try. Starting with soup. And what happens when a monster tries to be a man? What happens when a starving child trusts the wolf? Will warmth and food be enough to bridge the gap between fantasy father and dangerous reality? Or will his world's darkness swallow her whole before he learns how to be what she needs? The rain began to fall as they reached the restaurant door, and neither of them knew if it was washing something away or baptizing something new.